Hello, Garland Nixon here, coming from a secret bunker in an undisclosed location in Washington, D.C. Oops, make that West Virginia. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here, and I certainly hope I have sound and volume. As of now, I'm going to take it for granted that I do. You guys can let me know if I don't, but everything seems to be going so well. I'll look on chat, and you guys can let me know if the volume's good. All right, and the sound and all that kind of stuff. Nothing so far, but somebody's going to say something. Not your daddy. Hey, thanks a lot. All right. Well, it's been a very interesting last few days. Sounds good, thank you. It's been a very interesting last few days. For those of you who know the saga, which should be most everybody, I did a satirical tweet a couple of weeks ago. A satirical tweet, and here a couple of days ago, apparently 1 to 2 weeks later after that tweet, I got a notice from Twitter that said, "You're suspended." Here's the way it started: "You're suspended. You can't appeal." So I said, "Okay, great. I will appeal this." When I went to click on appeal, it said, "Oops, something's wrong. You can't do this. Try again later." I said, "Okay." Then I looked at my email, and I had immediately, as soon as I tried to appeal it, I got a notification from Twitter that said, "You're permanently suspended. You can't appeal." Right? And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I looked at the tweet, and it was a satirical tweet. You've all seen it by now. It's the infamous to-do list for Secretary Tony Blinken. And so I let some people know, and it really blew up. It really kind of went viral. And I think there's a number. Let's talk about why that went viral as it did, and why so many people were upset. Even people that didn't know me, didn't know anything about me, people that disagreed with my political opinions and affiliations, etc. A lot of people looked at that and had a big problem with it. Why is that? Everything good? Well, because Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he alleged that he was a free speech advocate, that he's standing up there, he's free speech. Oh, by the way, anybody who can, if you can, go ahead and share this on Twitter, or your social media, anybody out there, because this is connected to my suspended Twitter account, so I can't put it up on Twitter. So anybody who can, go ahead and share this live stream on Twitter. I would appreciate it. But at any rate, so I think the issue was this. It was a major issue. It wasn't about Garland Nixon, but the issue was important. So Elon Musk said that he was going to buy Twitter because he was a free speech purist, a free speech advocate, etc. So it was about free speech. And what was the issue of free speech prior to it? Why did people feel that their free speech had been inhibited? It was simple. What most people felt was that, okay, the government, most of us know, the government can violate your constitutional rights, but there's very few instances where, particularly like free speech, where a company or corporation could be held to the same standard. So what people felt was happening was this: if the government wanted you off of Twitter, we've seen instances of this off Facebook. It was even admitted by Jen Psaki, right? If the government wanted you off Facebook or Twitter or whatever, if they didn't like what you were saying about anything, right? COVID was one where it really blew up, but other things, foreign policy, etc., the government would literally contact the social media outlet and say, get this person off, or get this particular tweet off. And what a lot of us argued was that is essentially the government doing an end around the First Amendment. They're saying, I can't censor that tweet as a government. I can't throw that person off of social media as the government. But if I call my proxy at Twitter or wherever, they can do it. So people felt that they were being had, that the government couldn't do it. So the government just simply said, well, I'll just get somebody else to do it. And there were two things they were doing there. Number one, direct contact. But number two was they basically installed government operatives. We saw Alan McLeod did some great work on Mint Press, where he showed, Facebook and Google and Twitter, etc., that they were hiring people who were former intelligence, FBI, Department of Justice, CIA, and on, MI6, MI5, etc. They had one guy in Twitter that was still working for a group in the British military that worked on censorship, and he was a Twitter executive at the same time. So it was obvious what was going on. There was this incestuous relationship between the U.S. empire and its vassals, and the social media groups. So the censorship was on behalf of war, on behalf of any narrative that the U.S. empire wanted to further. So the obvious thing was, look, you're buying it, you're going to have free speech, you're going to have to allow them, first and foremost, as we all free speech advocates always say, you don't have to censor popular speech. The First Amendment is very specifically to protect unpopular speech. Nobody's going to censor you for standing on the corner, waving an American flag saying, "Go USA." But if you burn an American flag, if you stand on the corner and say the United States' policy regarding such and such, whatever it is bad, well, that's going to be unpopular with the government. And that's what needs to be, if you put it in the media, if you publish an article saying the government did something they shouldn't do and America needs to know about it, that very specifically should be protected. That's what creates democracy. That's what gives people a window into what their government is doing. And that's what was being usurped, shall we say, by this incestuous relationship between the government, the U.S. empire, the State Department, Department of Justice, the CIA, intelligence communities, on, and the social media platforms, and Google included, online platforms. So in order for Elon Musk to make a difference, very specifically, he would have to stop that. He would have to protect people's right to criticize, to discuss government policies in any way they deemed fit, particularly from a critical perspective, right? So he came on, and there was a big discussion, and the discussion was, there were those who were like, "Yay, I think he's going to do it." There was the people who are in favor of the government's narrative, being able to do whatever they want, who support the government no matter what, right? Who were saying he should be stopped because we got to have censorship. The government's got to be able to tell people what to say and what not to say. And then there was those of us who were saying we can decide for ourselves, and we should be able to, like, my follow and unfollow button works, my block and unblock button works. If I don't want to watch Alex Jones or David Icke, I should be able to block them or unblock them or follow them or unfollow them. I don't need the government to do it, and I don't need Twitter to do it on behalf of the government and tell me they're not acting on behalf of the government. We don't like being lied to. We don't like being had, particularly on behalf of those that would censor our speech. Okay, all of that saying, I think that's why my particular circumstance went viral, because people looked at it and they said, wait a minute, this is Garland's tweet is obviously satire, it's obviously humor. You might think it's funny, you might not think it's funny. You might look at it and say, hey, he put 1 through 5 and he put 3 in there twice. Garland's always up to something silly, right? But you couldn't argue that it was hateful conduct or abuse because it was a joke. It was satire. But it was critical of the policies of the U.S. government. It was satirically pointing out the absurdities and the viciousness of the U.S. empire's foreign policy. So Twitter immediately said, you're suspended. The other part of it is this. People looked at it and they're like, here's Garland. This guy's not some kind of a madman. He doesn't have a record of tweeting that he's going to kill people or beat up people or do bad things. He doesn't. Where do you look at Garland and say you look at this particular person? I don't agree with the censoring of Alex Jones, but they made their argument that he said things he shouldn't have said. And I would agree. Alex Jones has said things that he shouldn't have said, but I don't believe you should be censored just because you say some things that people like me or others, but somebody else doesn't like. I don't have to listen. I don't have to follow Alex Jones. But if he was, I would, because I want to hear what he has to say, whether I want to laugh at it, whether I want to say, hey, he's got a good point there. I want the opportunity to hear it for myself. I don't need some elite ruling class people telling me what I can and can't listen to or see. Don't need it. So what happened is I make this tweet, and immediately they look at it and they're like, you're out of here, you're gone for life, suspended, death penalty. So one of the questions is, wow, the death penalty, what was the crime that necessitated such an over-the-top response? Let me give you an example. As you probably know, my background in law enforcement investigations and all, one of the things that you'll look at, let's say there's a murder and I'm investigating a murder scene and I come there, what happened? This man was stabbed 177 times. My first thought is this: whoever did this was angry, had something against him. This was not a random killing. Now, it's possible they could have been a person who was insane and just flew into a rage and killed anybody they could. That's a possibility. But the likelihood is it was somebody that knew him, that was angry, and just kept stabbing him after he was dead because it was fury and anger, right? When you see an over-the-top violent reaction, you say there's some anger there. There's some emotion causing that, right? When you see somebody tweet something against saying that Tony Blinken is a monster, which I think he is, based on his policies, at that point, you say to yourself, whoever decided Garland had to be suspended for life was angry. That's an over-the-top reaction. We're looking at a guy. Let me give you an example. Am I a threat to somebody? When I left, there's people now that look at me and say, well, but Garland, you were in law enforcement. Why should I trust you? Right? And to which my answer is, you shouldn't. Don't, the hell no, you shouldn't trust me. When I say something, when I make a point, investigate it for yourself. I could be a CIA plant puppet. I say the same thing about myself that I say about everybody. Don't trust me. Don't trust anybody. Trust your damn self. Do some research. If Garland says something that you like or agree with or don't agree with, do some research and figure it out by yourself. But there's people, we don't trust you because you used to work with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, as an example. Before I left law enforcement, I was working for the governor's office. I was under the governor's office. And one of the things that I did was I was trained by DITRA. Oddly enough, I come to find that the next time I see this thing about DITRA, they're the people who they were the people who had the bio research labs in Ukraine, for God's sake. But I was trained by them, and I was trained in what is it called? Threat assessment, where you go. And so what my job was to go around the state of Maryland and to look at tunnels and stadiums and bridges and try to figure out what areas could be potential targets for terrorist attack, and then come up with ways to mitigate that threat, right? Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant, I worked on the security plan for that. Cove Point, which is a big gigantic LNG terminal, liquid natural gas terminal in Chesapeake Bay. So I was involved. And then after I would go to these places, I would do a report on them, I would research them, I would evaluate everything, I would look at their website, see how much information they had on their website. I remember going to the Harbor Tunnel saying, for God's sake, you guys got the blueprints to your tunnel on the website. If I wanted to blow the tunnel up, all I'd have to do is go to your website, to your blueprints, and find the weak spots, right? That's got to go. But things like that, right? And I would go back to and meet with the FBI's Joint Terrorist Task Force, and we would work with them, and I'd form. So the bottom line was, I'm some kind of a threat to Twitter, for God's sake. And then I retired and I did my work with the ACLU and all kinds of stuff. And I, I'm an anti-war person. I'm a pro-justice around the world person, right? So I'm going to take positions that the U.S. government ain't going to like, and that it is what it is, right? So let me continue. So in that, Elon Musk specifically argued that he bought this thing for free speech. And then you take a guy who has really a background in law enforcement, a background in anti-terrorism. You take this guy and you say he's such a threat because he pushed back against, and if you look at my tweet, one of the things that I pushed back against was the U.S.'s policies regarding Israel and the Palestinians. That's the third rail. So because I pushed back on that stuff, and because it was Tony Blinken that I went after with satire and comedy, I get thrown off Twitter. And people looked at that because so many people were like, let's wait and see what this guy does, right? Let's wait and see what Elon Musk does. And they were waiting, like the old people, the old joke, you see a movie where somebody's saying, Lord, give me a sign, give me a sign, give me a sign, right? A burning bush, whatever the hell, right? Well, people were saying, we want a sign of what he's going to do. Well, he starts by saying, okay, I'm going to bring Trump back. And people looked at it, and some people were like, yay. And other people were like, well, my position was like, wait a minute. Of course you're going to bring Trump back. If you're trying to build a business, if you bring Trump back and he starts tweeting, CNN, MSNBC will lose their minds. Fox will talk about it. Newsmax, OAN, if Trump starts tweeting, it will blow Twitter up. So the best thing that could happen from a financial perspective to Twitter was to bring Trump back and to get Trump to start tweeting. So of course, you're a businessman. If I own Twitter, I'd bring Trump back. Of course you would. So a couple other, was it Marjorie Taylor Greene or Bobbert or somebody, a couple of politicians. Okay, they're politicians. They are people who are members of the ruling class. Okay, you brought them back. Am I supposed to be impressed? So people are still watching, waiting. And then Garland Nixon comes along and says, hey, I don't like what we're doing to the Palestinians, in a satirical way. I oppose U.S. policies. I oppose Tony Blinken's policies against the Palestinians, against, our foreign policy. And wham, back we go. And people looked at it and they said, well, hell, what the hell did you spend $44 billion for to buy Twitter if you're going to do the same damn thing that they were doing before? What are you supposedly firing some woke group for? Then they come to find out, like supposedly he fired all of the woke people in Twitter who were saying, or a lot of the woke people in Twitter and this Twitter cyber rights security board, all of this neoliberal crap that is used for government censorship. Supposedly he got rid of all of that. But what people were saying was, what's the point of getting rid of that if as soon as somebody criticizes the empire, as soon as somebody criticizes foreign policy, as soon as somebody criticizes Israelis' persecution of the Palestinians, as soon as somebody says this ain't right, they get thrown off of Twitter for life. One strike, one time, and you're suspended for life. So everybody looked at that, and it wasn't about Garland Nixon. It was in that people could look at who I am and say, the man's a journalist, for God's sake. He's got a show on Radio Sputnik, yes. And you may be mad because that's Russian. But he has a show on Pacifica, WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C. That's mainstream radio. He's got a show on KPFK, Los Angeles, 90.7 in Los Angeles. That's the people in Los Angeles like it. So I'm on various different platforms. It's not like I'm stuck on one platform. So what is it about Garland that he has to go? What is it about? You said you were going to do the opposite. So people looked at me and they didn't say, well, we got to stand up for Garland. In a way they did, but it was, we got to stand up for free speech. And if we look at Garland as an example, if we look at his background, former law enforcement, if we look at his background, for God's sake, the man was on the National Board of Directors for the American Civil Liberties Union, standing up for the First Amendment. Right? If we look at for his background, we say, he's a threat. The guy's a threat. How the hell is he a threat? It didn't make sense. And what it came down to was that what you're doing to Garland is the exact same thing that was done before. So let me read an article. So bottom line is, let me find it. This. So what happened was then, and you've probably heard this by now, Musk did we got a bunch of 700 people. Excellent. Who may be asking why I'm in my truck, because I'm in West Virginia for the holiday weekend, the mountains of West Virginia, hanging out at a campground. Okay, so people hit the ceiling and were like, hey, this is a perfect example of what we're talking about. You have not changed. You're doing this. You bought this thing and you're doing the same thing. And people started getting angry at him, saying the obvious. You're a rich man. You're one of the richest man in the world. You've got contracts with the government, and if we put that together, and then you claim you were going to stop censoring, and you're censoring on behalf of the government, so people just felt like we've been had. Well, now we've got the evidence we need. Get out of here with that. And it was kind of a you lost. The woke people are angry because you won't censor. But a lot of people felt as though you shouldn't censor, and you said you shouldn't censor, but now you're being outed as a person who just plain old lied. That when it comes down to it, the question is, do you even have the authority or to stop censorship, or does the State Department, does the government exercise veto power? Right. And when people found out that what happened was a bunch of these NAFO trolls, which again is an intelligence operation, these NAFO trolls did a coordinated effort to get me thrown off. They were like, so the NAFO trolls got Garland thrown off, and you like looked at it like, hey, we got a bunch of complaints from about a bunch of NAFO trolls, which everybody knows this government is an intelligence operation. We will use that as an excuse to throw off a guy. Well, that ain't free speech. So I may be wrong. Maybe I'm told I had nothing to do with it. Maybe not me, but maybe my dynamic, my issue had nothing to do with it. But I kind of think he did. It did, because people were coming after him, and I did so many interviews everywhere. Everybody wanted to talk to me. Twitter. I looked at TikTok. People are calling me all over the place. And again, it wasn't Garland Nixon. I'm just a schmuck. I'm nobody, you know. But it was, you liar. You told us you were going to do free speech, and now we have the evidence that you're not. Elon Musk does a poll, and the poll says, hey, do people want all suspended accounts returned? And the poll came up 77% yes. And Elon Musk said, all of them, all suspended accounts, all of them come back next week. Now, the question is, and let me say this, that's unambiguous. Because there are people saying, do you think he'll bring David Icke back? Do you think he'll bring Alex Jones back? Do you think, no, that's not a question. Based on what Elon Musk said, everybody, if you weren't guilty of egregious spamming, not just spamming, egregious spamming, he said, or broke the law, if you didn't want to do one of those two things, you're getting your account back according to Elon Musk. In other words, he's moving these third rails that say you can't criticize the government, you can't criticize Israeli policy, you can't criticize U.S. foreign policy, things of that nature. You can't say that you disagree with something about the war in Ukraine unless it has I hate Putin in it, those kind of things. According to that, then everybody comes back, including me. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know, but let me read something to you. So what happens? The people lose their minds at what is it, at in the mainstream news. So there's an article AP News, Elon Musk, and they go on to say that he's going to let all suspended accounts back, right? And they've got this guy that says this: it's a disaster waiting to happen. So if you allow people on Twitter who you don't think should be on Twitter to say things you don't think they should be able to say, that's a disaster. But again, that's elitism, because don't I have the ability to block or unfollow? You can even mute certain words. You can say anything to do with these words, Garland Nixon, mute anything. I don't want any tweets. I don't want to see anything that has to do with that, right? If you don't like Alex Jones, you can mute Alex Jones. I don't want anything to do with that. So if it's a disaster waiting to happen, what is the disaster? Yeah, it is for the mainstream media. It is for the U.S. empire. They say it's a disaster waiting to happen, said Citron, who is also vice president of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative. Yeah, Civil Rights Initiative. Free speech is a disaster waiting to happen. Why don't those two things go together? But read this. He says, it's crazy because the whole point of the permanent suspension, and this is why I think my account makes so much, makes the point. He says, it's crazy because the whole point of the permanent suspension is because, listen to this, the whole point of the permanent suspension is because these people were so bad, they were bad for business. So according to him, the problem with Garland Nixon, according to him, it's a disaster. You can't allow Garland Nixon on Twitter because he's so bad. A man who did over 20 years in law enforcement, who retired holding the rank of major, who worked on terrorism issues with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, a man who was on the board of directors for the American Civil Liberties Union, a guy who taught college students criminal justice. I can teach 19-year-olds criminal justice, but I'm so bad. I can teach people about the Constitution. I can teach them constitutional law. I can teach them civics, teach them how the courts work, how law enforcement work. I can teach them the history. I taught organized crime. I can teach all of that stuff to college students, but I'm so bad that I can't be on Twitter. That is the absurdity of it. That's why it doesn't make any sense. That's why people are pushing back on it. People are saying this is absurd and ridiculous. So all of that, I'll say all that to say this. I want to thank everybody for following me. Or no, well, nobody's followed me because ghosts don't have accounts. But if I had an account, if I were still amongst the living and I wasn't a ghost, and there are those who know what I'm talking about, I would thank people for following my account. Because, of course, I can't have a new account because according to Twitter, I will get suspended if I open a new account. So, but once you go to the great beyond, I think things get a little iffy as to exactly whether a living person or a ghost has an account. Who knows? I don't think a decision has been made on that for those living in the great beyond. All right, let us continue. So now that I've said all of that, that was fun. What a great, can I tell you this also? As you all know, I practice Zen. There's nothing to practice, which makes practicing Zen easy, because there's nothing to practice because there's no such thing as Zen, right? It is an imaginary finger pointing at the moon, right? That's Zen. So my point is, as soon as a practitioner of a philosophy that does not exist, as soon as I was suspended, I looked at it and my first reaction was, it's the best thing that can possibly happen. I don't know why, but it'll turn out to be that way. I always say that, whenever something happens that's major, I say it's the best thing that could possibly happen. I don't know why, but I'll find out later. And that never fails me. And this time, if this either precipitates or is one of the factors that helps to precipitate actual free speech on a social media platform, wonderful, whether they let me back or not, right? Which I suspect, now I'm thinking, Elon Musk said it. He's going to have to. The other part is, let's give Elon Musk credit. Let's not just attack him. This is a big company. I'm not saying that Elon Musk looks at every Twitter account that he looked at mine and said, oh, that son of a bitch, Garland, he's a dead man, suspended. Of course not. That happened down the line somewhere that he didn't know. Somewhere he had no idea. Somebody looked at that tweet. Somebody read that tweet because it was a week and a half later, at least. Somebody looked at it and said, oh, he's got to go. Suspension for life. Whoever did it. I would say this, Elon Musk should go through the halls of Twitter and say, I want to know exactly who read that tweet and said it had to go, and fire that person, because they're pushing back. They're destroying what he's trying to create. If in fact he is trying to create something, I don't know that he is. If he's trying to create a free speech platform, whoever did that is destroying that, and I think he should go find them and deal with them appropriately, however he deems necessary. He's the company owner, but that should be dealt with, whether he wants to fire him. I am a person who is always advocates on behalf of labor. My dad was a longshoreman. He was in a union, so always advocate. So I'm very hard pressed to say fire somebody, retrain, rethink, watch them, whatever. I'm hard pressed to ever say fired employee because I'm such a pro labor person. Even the person who did me in, to me, you got to stand for your principles, and my principles are pro labor. So whoever fired me, I don't think they should be fired, but I think they should be given a day off without pay. How about we do something like that? That's the kind of things that labor representatives ask for. Okay, so let's move forward. So let's see where because originally he claimed to put his money where his mouth it was by buying Twitter and saying, okay, I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to make a free speech platform. Well, now he's bought it. Now he's had this incident. And now let's see what he does. And in the same way that I've been bashing the hell out of Elon Musk for doing that, for allowing this to happen, I think it was a great idea for him to do. It was a good thing for him to do the referendum. I wouldn't have done it because I don't necessarily believe that free speech should be something that people all say yes. How many people, we all in favor of free speech say aye, all opposed say nay. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. Because free speech is unpopular speech, and more often than not, you'll get all nays because it's unpopular. You got to protect the speech that everybody's going to say nay. I don't want that out there. That's specifically the ones you have to protect. So I would disagree with him doing the poll, but because of the history of Twitter, everybody said yes. So great, 77%. So then he said, okay, I'm going to fix it. So here's what I'll say. If Elon Musk fix it, we got to give him credit. We got to bash him when this happens. We should, him and anybody else, me included. If he does the right thing, if he lets people back on, then I will say, you know what? This was the best thing that could have possibly happened. I knew it from the beginning because I'm a practitioner of Zen. But never go after the Zen master, brothers. If you go after the Zen master, it's going to ricochet and hit you back and hit you every time, because there's nothing to hit. When you throw something at the Zen master, there's nothing to hit, man. There's nothing there. It's kind of like martial arts, where somebody's swinging, you move, you're here, you're here, you're here, you're here, you're here. You're right. You don't give them anything to hit. Don't give them anything to swing at. And so ultimately, the guy swings and you move your head and he hits his fist into the wall and he breaks his fist. He's the one that injured himself. So when they came after me as a practitioner of Zen, there was nothing for him to hit, just like swinging at smoke right through, and their fist came around, boink. Oh, I hit myself in the nose. That's the way it works. So at any rate, we will continue. So that's that. As I've said, if Elon Musk does what he said he's going to do, and I have to take him at his word, I will go on and say, that's what I'm talking about. Good job, Elon Musk. Let's carry on and keep forward. So we'll see. Whatever it is, what it is. I don't think I really don't think Elon Musk gives a crap what I think. And that's obvious because they threw me off Twitter in the first place. But, I'll say it because I believe in standing for my principles. And when somebody does the right thing, I'm going to say they do the right thing. When they do the wrong thing, I'm going to say they do the wrong thing. Now let's move on to the EU. I had an article here. So, if you've been paying attention, let me see if I can find an article. I'm in a truck. It ain't easy. Here we go. So one of the things I've been talking about, and this has hit pretty big, and I don't know, this could have pissed some people off. This could have been one of the reasons, to be quite frank. It could be one of the reasons that I got thrown off. It could be one of the reasons the NAFO trolls all came after me. As you know, and this is an update on something I've been talking about. So, I went on the Duran, I went on George Galloway, and I posited a theory. And so I'm updating on something else. And my theory was, that the U.S. is deliberately let me give you the whole theory. I'll make it the 1 minute version. So it is that Joe Biden, when he ran for president, said, I'm going to bring good jobs back. I'm going to bring industry back. I'm going to bring lots of jobs back to America. And we all looked at him and laughed and said, yeah, just bull crapping us again. You can't do that because the jobs went to China and the labor costs in China are so much lower. All the costs in China are so much lower. The price cost of living in China is lower. So therefore we can't compete. You can't bring the jobs back from China. The oligarchs in America moved those jobs over to China in the first place because they can do it cheaper. And then they blame China for taking the jobs that they moved there, right? So we said, that's a bunch of crap. You can't do it. Well, it appears that he meant what he said, but he wasn't talking about China. And my point was what he did, what happened. The United States then set forth a dynamic in instigating the Ukraine war. And I believe that they instigated it intentionally. And that they were then able to cut Europe off from its cheap energy supply, which Europe's industrial model is founded in a very cheap supply of energy because the labor costs are high. The cost of living is high in Europe. But because they have extremely low energy costs, because they get their energy inexpensively from Russia, they can still compete. They can still make their widgets, whatever they make, and they can make them at a reasonable price, and they can compete with India. They can compete with China, some of these other countries that have low labor costs because they have low energy costs, and it evens out, right? Well, the Biden administration simply set forth a dynamic where they cut them off from those low energy costs. And what's going to happen? Then they passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the first of many, and they set forth a dynamic in that to make it much more hospitable for industries in Europe to operate in the U.S. than to operate in the EU. Okay, so what ultimately happened was the United States purposely deindustrialized the EU and grabbed basically stole the industry. Then when Biden's looking at it and he's saying, in order for us to compete with China, China's growing, their industry's growing. We don't have any industry. We need to reindustrialize. We need to bring industry back. Where are we going to get it? We'll get it from the EU. We'll suck the EU dry of all their industry. We'll set up the dynamics. We'll pass the Inflation Reduction Act. Boom, the industry leaves there. So I said that. And I mean, it's obviously true. You got to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to be able to see that. So I do believe that once I started that ball rolling, and that really started hitting, and you didn't hear much of it. There was a little bit, but I did that. There was articles written in Europe about it. There were people talking about it everywhere, and then all of a sudden, man, that thing blew up in Europe. And I don't know that I was the instigator of that, but it kind of seemed like it's possible. I don't know. I'm not trying to take credit for everything, but that was the position I took, and I feel like there's a possibility that the people in power in the EU were not thrilled with Garland Nixon for taking that position. Okay, so let me read it. But what happens? The European leaders still, they got to pretend they are puppets for the U.S. empire, but they must pretend that they're standing up for their people, right? Here's an NPR story. Europe fears its industries will jet to the U.S. as energy costs force plant closures. Gee, and you know what? I fear the sun will come up tomorrow, as it has every other day. I fear that winter is coming and it'll get colder. I fear that if I jump off a cliff, I'll go down, not up. Yeah, okay, boy, great work there, Sherlock. So, but here's what's interesting. You go down here a bit, and here's what they say. Oh, coal is back. Europe is focused on climate and all this. And you get down and it says, can I find it? Hold on a minute. Now listen to this. So in this article, it says quite a few of these industries will never reopen in Europe. Bro says they're never going to get enough energy anyway. So why on earth would you use gas in Europe if it's coming from the US? You're much better off putting your chemical company in the US. That's what I said. It's blatantly obvious. But they go on to say, this, there is increasing talk of a coming deindustrialization of Europe. Coming, bringing unemployment, a change of lifestyle, and possibly social unrest. Nah, and people will just be fine with no jobs and poverty and no food. It doesn't really bother people, no social unrest there. But then they go on to say, listen to this, listen to this. This is exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin wanted. He started two wars, he says, one in Ukraine and one against the EU, using gas as a weapon. So let me understand this. The Europeans deliberately cut themselves off from Russian gas. The United States blew up the pipeline that sent gas from Russia to the EU. The Russians say, we would be happy to keep supplying you gas at market price. No problem at all. You want gas, we'll supply it from you. The Europeans say, we don't want your gas. We'd rather starve our people to stinking death and send all of our industry to the U.S. than take your gas, you creep. Oh, by the way, the U.S. blew up the pipeline. We can't get your gas anyway. It's hopeless. And then this guy says, oh, yeah, Vladimir Putin in Russia, they're using gas as a weapon. Right? Europe is faced with flight of its industry, jobs, and capital towards the U.S. French economist and historian Nicolas Bavares wrote recently in the magazine Le Point. He estimates it will take several years to compensate for Russian gas, and during this energy period, energy will be rationed and expensive in Europe. Fabrice Lassage, a spokesman for France's largest business association, MEDEF, calls the potential to lose business to the U.S. a disaster for our economy. It's not a winning situation when you have your closest ally becoming very weak. It's not in the U.S. interest to see our industry collapse. Oh, really? Then why are they doing it? So here's my point about the EU leaders, these schmucks that are writing about it. The people are robbing you, and you're making excuses for the robbers. They got a gun in your face. They're taking your wallet out of your pocket, and you're making excuses for them as they rob. That's what the leaders are doing. The leaders should be saying to the people of Europe, we're being robbed. We're being robbed, and this has to stop. But no, are they saying we're being robbed and this has to stop? Absolutely not. Instead, they're saying, yeah, Our business is going, all of our businesses are going to the US, and there's no way to stop it. Whose fault is it? Vladimir Putin's. Well, how in the hell are you going to fix it if you're blaming somebody else? You're going along. Look, what does Biden want you to do? What does the US empire want you to do? They want you to accept that they're robbing you and to blame some damn body else. So now we got Macron and some of these other people going out and they're doing this false fake, we're mad, we're going to push back against the US. Really? You're going to push back against the US? Okay. So the problem is you're not getting cheap Russian energy anymore. Are you going to start taking getting cheap Russian energy? No. What they're saying is this. The US is doing subsidies to these countries, to companies to move them to the US, right? So now the EU says, well, we're going to do subsidies. Oh, so now it's a race to see who can give the most to corporations. Oh, that ain't neoliberalism. We got corporations. And where's that money come from, by the way? Out of the taxpayers' pockets. So here's what we're going to do. The US says our taxpayers are going to give more money to these corporations so they'll come to the US, to these billionaire oligarchs so they'll come to the US. And then the EU says, no, no, no. We'll give them even more money to the billionaire oligarchs that own these corporations to keep them here. Well, of course, you know what the U.S. is going to say? Oh, yeah? Well, we'll give even more money. And they're going to go back and forth fighting over who gets to give the most subsidies to the corporate oligarchs to get them to stay. And who wins again? And who loses. And ultimately, when it's said, it's all a fraud, because we know the EU doesn't have the kind of money that the US has, and ultimately the US is going to take their industry. But I think to myself, it's all a fraud. They already, if I know that, and you know that, you think Macron and Schultz and Sunak don't know that? They know that their job is to be controlled opposition. Their job is to pretend that they're standing up for you. Now that the cat is out of the bag, now that everybody knows the truth, that the US is deliberately stealing the industry from the EU, they have to now have a pillow fight with the US and pretend it's a knife fight. They got to now say, hey, you know, we're going to fight back against our masters in the US. They're doing it for their constituents, because if they just lay down and don't even pretend to fight, when their people wake up and they're living in freaking shanty towns, now you already know that. We already know Berlin, Paris, they are going to be surrounded. You ever like go to some of these cities in some countries and you see a city that's surrounded by these like shanty towns where people live in cardboard boxes? That's all Europe is going to be. There's nothing else it can be. People don't want to believe it. They'll find out the hard way. So when people are living in sewage, back to, you know, the diseases of the medieval times are going to be back because there's sewage flowing through the streets of Paris and London and Berlin. That's coming. There's no way it can't. They have to be able to say, but we tried to fight it. So they do their obligatory head nod. We don't want them to take our companies. What are you going to do? We're going to blame Putin, just like they want us to do. And let's face it, when it's all said and done, do you think Sunak and these people are going to stick around once Europe turns into a dystopian hellscape? They'll be in some gated community just south of Miami. Every last stinking one of them. They'll leave you to suffer the consequences, because that's your job. The U.S. empire has said we need industry from the EU, and the job of the EU is to give up that industry with the jobs and the lifestyle and the culture and everything that came along with it. Because the U.S. doesn't care. They're ready to, quote, compete with China, as it were, and they can't do it without industry. That means it's time for you to lose your industry, and it's time for the leaders in the EU to pretend to pillow fight the U.S., to pretend, come on, they do everything their masters tell them, and we're supposed to believe that they're pushing back. You got to be a real sap to believe that. But maybe there are saps enough to believe it. I'm sure there are. There's people still running around as the winter comes and they freeze. They're still got it flying a blue and yellow flag. So I guess if they're stupid enough to do that all the way to the poorhouse, then they'll believe anything they're told at this point. And guess whose fault it is? You guessed it, Vladimir Putin. And so what we got now, imagine this. It's like what the leaders are doing. It's like a person who has two personalities. You know, on one hand, you got somebody who walks up. Let me put it differently. Actually, the U.S. empire is not robbing It's not stealing industry from Europe. It's not robbing industry from Europe. The leaders of Europe are handing it over. The U.S. simply requested it. Excuse me, we need your industry. And the leaders of the European Union are saying, what do you need us to do? Well, first of all, stop buying cheap energy from Russia. That's what will happen. And the leaders of Europe said, yes, we got you. We buying that cheap energy. That'll close our industries down for you, sir. And the U.S. then says, now, what I need you to do, it looks like somebody's let the cat out of the bag, and people are starting to figure out that your industry is all going to move to the U.S. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to pretend like you're pushing back on it. Yes, sir, we will. And anything else? No, that's it. Just pretend like you're pushing back. Just give it a head nod or something like that and a wink. Okay. So the EU leaders then say, here, I want you to take everything that we got on a silver platter. Can we help? You know, it's like somebody comes up and you just say, excuse me, sir, would you like my money? Yes, here, take it. Anything else? Oh my God, I got this ring. It's a nice gold. Would you like this? Yeah, here, take it. Anything else? Here's my shoes. Here's my shirt. So somebody just walks up and they ask you for your stuff and you just hand it to them. And they say, thank you very much. And then you say, oh, you forgot my watch. Oh, okay. Is it a nice watch? Are you kidding me? This is this is an Omega watch. I paid $3,000 for it. You can have it. And you take the watch off, you hand it to the person. The person says, gee, thanks for giving me everything. And then you look at the person and you say, you son of a bitch, you robbed me. I'll never forgive you. And the person's like, you just handed me all this stuff. Oh, I handed you all this stuff, huh? Yeah, that's of course what you'd say. You, sir, are a thief, and I'm going to fight you. And the person's like, but you asked me to take it? You're like, oh yeah. Oh, well, wait 1 more second. And they're like, yeah, they're like, what? They're like, you left this ring. Here's another ring that I had. Actually, my grandmother gave me this ring. It's a really nice gold ring, probably worth $2,000 or $3,000. I don't know. Let me shine it up. You shine the ring up for them. You shine it with your a couple times. Yeah, you hold it up. Take out a little jeweler's glass. Yeah, that's an original diamond ring made in 1894. Here you go. You hand them the ring. And they're like, oh, thanks. This ring is worth a couple grand. You're like, absolutely. Just go pawn it and keep the money. And they're like, thanks. And then you go, you son of a bitch. You stole my ring. You ring thieving bastard. You're going to die now. You ring thieving son of a bitch. And they're like, you just handed me that ring and you told me a bit. Oh, that's exactly what a ring thief would take. That's what we got going on. They're literally, the leaders of Europe are just saying, US, yeah, take all of our industry, take our jobs, service industries, any industries we got, please take them. They're yours. And the US is like, okay, thanks. Here, let me put a bow on. This is BASF, BMW. Hey, we're going to be making batteries too. Yeah, we're just going to move that industry there. Okay, take everything we got. Our people, don't worry about them. Their jobs are gone, their lives, their lifestyle, their culture, their pubs will close, everything. They're friggin' done. But just take all of this and walk. And the U.S. is like, thanks. And then they look back at their people and they go, you sons of bitches, you robbed us. We're going to fight now. We're going to stand up to you. And handing them everything. So I got to change it. They weren't robbed. The EU is not being robbed by the U.S. The EU is being robbed by the leaders of the EU who are packing all your stuff up and handing it to the US. They are staging it right now. Let me explain the word staging. Go for my law enforcement investigative days. I remember an instance of a break-in where some people came home, and when they got home, when they opened the front door, the back sliding glass door was open and the curtains were blowing in the wind like somebody had just left, and they saw this stuff by the back door, TVs, radios, computers by the back door. And the person, what happened? The criminals had broken into the house and they took all of the things that they wanted, and they were putting them instead of taking them all out at one time, they're putting them all by the back door. It's called staging. They were going to stage all the things that they wanted to take at the back door, and then they were going to take it all and run out at once and take all the stuff. They were staging their stolen goods by the back door so they could take it with them. They were storing it in one spot so they could take it with them, right? Unfortunately, for them, the family came home, opened the front door, they heard the noise, they took off, and so they weren't able to take the goods. They just staged it all, right? Well, fortunately for the family, they didn't see them because they were witnesses. Those people might have killed them. You know how these criminals are. You see them in your house, you can identify them, they may kill you. So the family was very lucky that they didn't see these bastards. But my point is this. Right now, the EU leaders are staging this industrial move. They're setting everything up. Look, what are they doing now? They're doing even more policies. They're saying we're going to do gas. They want to do some kind of a gas price cap. Now, Russia's already said, if you do that, I'm not selling you any more gas. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's exactly why oil. And they're like, if you do that, we won't sell you any more oil. And I'm like, that's specifically why they're doing it. So you will stop selling oil. Right now, there may be a few industries that can still make it in the EU. They got to make sure that everything, all energy is stopped to the EU. Now, the people are going to starve and die, but what do they give a shit about them? Less mouths to feed. They ain't going to have jobs anyway. So they're going to do more. Trust me when I say this. There will be more. There will be more cutting off of energy. Cutting off. Guess what? The things that are used to make airplanes for Airbus. They're going to stop that stuff going to Europe. Why? Because they want Boeing to have all of the jobs the Airbus has. They're going to stop the things that are used, titanium for airplanes. All these things that they get from Russia to the EU, the raw materials that are used to make things, one by one, the EU leaders will cut every one of them off in the guise that we've got to stop this because we don't want Putin to make money. In reality, it's going to be, hey, we can still make airplanes. What do we need to do? Stop getting aluminum and titanium. You see the aluminum. Go and search right now and see if the aluminum market ain't crashing. Why? Because they can still use it to make cars and airplanes in European industry. So they're going to cut that off. They're going to cut off titanium, all the things. They're cutting off the energy. They will now cut off the raw materials coming into EU that's used to make various industrial things, industries used to make various products, or to keep these things going. They're going to cut all that stuff off to ensure that the industries, there's still some industries that might be able to make it. They can't handle that. So they cut off their energy. Some of them can still make it. Next, they cut off their raw materials. All of them are done. And they all move to the EU. And meanwhile, what they say to you is, to think about how stupid this is. Number one, Putin is evil, and we're doing this to stop him. We're cutting off our nose we're hanging ourselves. We're shooting ourselves in the head because we got a headache. That's what they're saying. We got a headache. What's that? Vladimir Putin. What's your solution? I'm gonna put a gun in my head and pull the trigger. That'll stop the headache. Yeah. Okay. Good move. It'll stop all your troubles will go away. So next comes raw materials, and bit by bit, look at this. Let's be honest about this. Do you think Garland Nixon and the people that are watching this live stream are any smarter or stupider than Ursula von der Leyen and Schultz and Macron? You think they're stupider than we are? They're not. Your people are like, they're stupid. They don't even know. No. These people are not stupid. There's nothing stupid about him. They're smart. If we can figure out, if we know that Joe Biden wants to steal all the industry and move it, if we know that cutting off the energy to their industry will shut down their industry, if we know that cutting down the raw materials to their industry will shut down their industry, if we know that right now their industry is moving to the U.S., what are we supposed to be stupid? You think they don't know it? If we can look at their mealy mouth, worthless gripes and complaints to say, yeah, we're going to stand up to the U.S. and stop them from doing the very thing that we're helping them to do. If we know that it's a pillow fight, that it's a fraud, that it's a fake, what they can't figure it out. Look, they know it. We know it. And to some extent, they know we know it. But I don't want to go too far with they know what we know that they know. But I can go there, right? But they know what they're doing. They're sending industry to U.S. and they're wiping out Europe. We know they're sending all the industry to the U.S. and they're wiping out Europe. They know that we know it. They know. Yeah, they're looking now and they're like, oh shit, they figured us out. But you know what else they know? That all they got to do is give us some propaganda about Putin being evil, some propaganda about blue and yellow flags, need a little more money for the Azov Nazis, and we will keep our mouths shut and go, yeah, we got to stop Putin. They know that all they got to do is give us enough hope and we'll hang ourselves. Yes, sirree. Very soon, the Ukrainians will win and democracy will be saved. Now, 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever, the people in the EU are going to wake up and say, I think we've been had. We've been took, hoodwinked, led astray, bamboozled, lied to, misled. Macron, Sunak, Schultz, and they're going to be like sitting at their villa in Homestead, Florida, whatever, Hollywood, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, whatever the hell. They'll be sitting there looking out over the palm trees. Somebody's roasting a pig with an apple in its mouth. There's servants walking around on your dollars. But the good news is some Europeans will get to migrate to the United States as indentured servants. I mean, hey, we'll have all of these new jobs. They sure as hell ain't going to want to pay. You know what they'll do? Look, they're setting, and I love this too. They're setting you guys up because now they're setting Ukraine up where there's going to be 15 million, trillion, billion new Ukrainian refugees coming in, and they're going to be armed to the frickin' teeth, and they ain't going to be happy. And some of them will be sporting, shall we say, a rather odious ideology that was quite popular in Germany during the 1930s. Not all of them, but some of them will be walking around, and they ain't going to be happy either. Their country's blown to hell. You think they're going to go back? Look, first of all, take a look at Ukraine. It wasn't hitting on much in the first place. You really think they're going back? They ain't. They're staying in Western Europe. And you know what? You ain't going to be happy because there's going to be no jobs for you, and you're going to have millions of new people who don't have jobs and are not happy. And they're going to be spray painting swastikas all over the damn place. Oh, I'm glad I don't live in Western Europe. And in Macron and the elite ruling class, they ain't going to live there either. Do you think for 1 second that the elite ruling class of Europe is going to stay there when Europe turns into a dystopian hellscape, when it looks like 28 days later, when it looks like a zombie apocalypse? Do you really think the elite leadership, they're going to look, they have no allegiance to any particular country or to any, there are no borders. So when the industry moves here, and there's jobs and there's money here, and Europe is a dystopian hellscape, they're going to go here. They're going to go, well, now that BASF, I'm the owner of BASF, now that BASF has moved to whatever, Arkansas, I got to move to Arkansas also because, I got to keep an eye on my business. So the leaders of the business, the management, the owners, the administrators of the business, they're going to move here. They're going to follow their industry right here. The only people that will be left, and you know what they'll do? They will also take the most skilled laborers that they need. They'll bring skilled labor here, doctors and lawyers and people like that have great skills. They're getting the hell out. They'll be like, hey, we better get out of Europe. This place is dangerous. I don't like it. There's nothing but friggin' people running around eating each other. We're out of here. And gigantic shanty towns, we're done. And sewage running through the streets, we're out. And so they're going to leave. And the only thing that's going to be left is the working class, the working poor, and a bunch of Ukrainian refugees. Let me tell you, the Middle Eastern people, all the Middle Eastern people that Western Europe is so unhappy about that are there as a result of the U.S. blowing up their countries, they're going to hell back. Those countries in the Middle East are joining like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're going to have business and jobs and things like that. They're going to be like, hey, we're going home. Things are looking good kind of home. Getting the hell out of Europe. The African refugees, they're out of there. They're done. They're going to be like, well, maybe poor back home, but at least it's warm. We're out of here. And the Europeans will be left to their fate. Well, that's that. I want to thank everybody. Since I am I'm in my truck, so unfortunately I can't really, go over my Rockfin stuff and go over everything. Let me look, make sure. So hopefully I am going live. Hopefully I am live on Rockfin. I don't know what the hell's going on. Let me look. At any rate, am I still on Rockfin? Am I still on Rockfin? I'm having a time here. When you're working from your car, it ain't all that easy. I don't know. Hopefully Rockfin's on. But thanks a lot, everybody. Garland Nixon here. I'm out. As you know, I was suspended off Twitter. There's various ghosts haunting Twitter, so you may be able to find a spiritual creature floating around Twitter. But as for me, I'm tossed off. So if you get a chance, share this on all of your social media platforms. Thanks a lot, everybody. I will get to the I'll actually do another when I get back, hopefully tomorrow evening, Sunday evening. I'll go over the super chats and all that stuff. Thanks a lot, everybody. Let me see. Everybody's there. stolen and sold USA weapons. We already have statues to Ukraine Nazi leaders in Alberta and Manitoba. Yeah, what a mess. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. I got to get running. I'm out.